The rain had started just as the last guest pulled away from the mansion, streaking the tall glass windows with thin silver lines. Inside, the chandeliers still glowed, casting cold light over half-cleared platters of food and untouched wine glasses. The house smelled faintly of lilies, the kind people send when they don't know what else to say. Walter Hale stood in the foyer, shoulders heavy under his black wool coat. His son's photograph, framed in polished oak, still sat on the entry table, staring back at him with a grin that didn't belong in a house this quiet. Daniel Hale had been his only son, his pride. Now all that remained of him was a folded flag from the service and a will no one had yet dared to open. Marissa's heels clicked against the marble floor as she descended the staircase. She looked flawless, her dark dress fitted perfectly, her makeup untouched by tears. Walter searched her face for softness, for some sign of the young woman Daniel had once sworn was the love of his life. But her eyes were cold, sharp in a way that made the room feel colder. "You should go now," she said, her voice even, like she was dismissing a guest who had overstayed a dinner party. Walter turned slowly toward her. "Go? It's late. I'll stay in the guest room tonight. We can talk tomorrow." Her jaw tightened. "There is no tomorrow here for you. This is my house now. Daniel left it to me." The words landed like stones. Walter's grip on his suitcase handle tightened. "Your house?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said, her tone growing harder. "And you're not welcome anymore." She stepped closer, her heels striking the marble with finality. "Pack your bags, old man. Go die in a dumpster, for all I care. But you're not staying here." The movers, hired for the reception cleanup, paused by the door. They looked down awkwardly, pretending not to hear, but the words filled the foyer like a slap. Walter's chest burned, his throat tight. He wanted to shout, to remind her of the years he had helped build this family's fortune, the countless hours mentoring Daniel, the sacrifices made quietly. But the weight of grief pressed harder than anger. He bent slowly, picked up his suitcase, and slipped the framed photograph of Daniel into it. His hand lingered on the glass, on the smile that would never age. At the door, he turned once more. Marissa had already spun away, barking orders at the movers to clear the old man's things into storage. She didn't even watch him leave. The storm hit his face the moment he stepped outside. Cold rain soaked through his coat as he walked down the long drive, his shoes splashing in shallow puddles. Behind him, the house loomed with glowing windows, tall and silent, as though it had swallowed his son's memory whole. Walter stopped at the gate. For one long moment, he looked back. The chandelier inside glittered through the rain, and Marissa's shadow passed by the window, already moving through the house like it had always belonged to her. The small red light of the Ring camera blinked at him. He remembered Daniel insisting to keep the account in Walter's name just in case. At the time, Walter had thought it unnecessary. Now, as the rain slid down his face, he wondered if that tiny blinking light might become his only witness. He turned away, clutching his suitcase with numb fingers. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though he were dragging years of sacrifice behind him. The storm swallowed him, but the words stayed, echoing inside him with every crack of thunder. "Pack your bags, old man." And as the mansion doors closed behind him, something inside Walter Hale shifted, not anger yet, not revenge. Just a hollow space where trust had died, leaving only silence and the faintest whisper of a plan. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and damp carpet, the kind of place where curtains never truly close and the hum of the old heater is louder than thought. Walter set his suitcase on the bed, his coat dripping onto the threadbare carpet. He lowered himself onto the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning beneath his weight, and stared at the shadows crawling up the water-stained walls. He felt hollow. Not from hunger, not from fatigue, but from something deeper, betrayal layered over grief. Hours earlier, he had stood in the mansion he once helped build with Daniel, listening to Marissa's voice carve him out of it like he was nothing more than an unwelcome tenant. Now he was alone, stripped of dignity, holding only a suitcase and memories no one seemed to want. From the side pocket of the bag, he pulled out the leather binder Daniel had pressed into his hands a week before the end. The binder was thick, heavy, and worn smooth from use. On its back cover was a crooked sticky note, written in Daniel's messy scrawl. "Dad, don't read this alone. The final page matters." Walter ran his thumb over the words, his chest tightening. His son's voice seemed to echo in the silence. He flipped the binder open. Inside were colored tabs, blue for financials, green for the will, yellow for trust documents. Each section was neatly organized, every line initialed in Daniel's shaky handwriting. Walter's eyes blurred as he skimmed page after page. Daniel had thought of everything: medical directives, power of attorney, asset lists. The detail was overwhelming, but the message was clear: Daniel had planned carefully. When he reached the tab marked Annex D, Walter noticed something unusual. The section was stapled separately, tucked at the back. He didn't pull it out. Not yet. His son's note stopped him. "Don't read this alone." His hands trembled as he closed the binder. Instinct told him this was no ordinary clause, it was something Daniel had buried for a reason. Something Marissa hadn't expected. Walter leaned back against the headboard, listening to the rain hammer against the motel window. The sound reminded him of the foyer that night, Marissa's cold voice still sharp in his ears. "Pack your bags, old man." The motel's neon sign buzzed outside, throwing flashes of red light across the room. Walter stared at the binder on the bedspread, then at his phone lying next to it. One name came to mind: Harriet Rhodes. She had been the family's attorney for decades, sharp as a blade, loyal to Daniel but always respectful of Walter. If anyone could make sense of this, it was her. His thumb hovered over her number for a long moment before he pressed dial. The line rang twice before her steady voice answered. "Walter? It's late. Are you all right?" "No," he said quietly. His voice cracked, betraying the weight of it all. "But I think Daniel left me something. Something important. I need you to see it." There was a pause on the other end, then Harriet's voice softened. "Bring it to my office tomorrow. Don't talk to anyone else, not yet. And Walter, hold on. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." He ended the call and looked back at the binder. His son's warning echoed again: the final page matters. For the first time since he walked out of the mansion, a flicker of something stirred in Walter's chest. Not hope exactly, but the outline of it. A possibility. He turned off the light, leaving the binder on the bedspread beside him. The motel room went dark except for the pulsing glow of the neon sign. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. Inside, Walter lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind circling the same thought. If Marissa believed she had one, she hadn't read far enough. Not yet. Morning light broke weakly over the courthouse square, the sky washed in dull gray. Walter pushed open the heavy glass door to Rhodes and Associates, binder clutched to his chest like a lifeline. The receptionist, a young woman in a blazer 2 sizes too big, looked up and softened at the sight of him. "Mr. Hale," she said gently, "she's expecting you." The hallway smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. Walter's shoes echoed against the polished tile as he walked toward Harriet Rhodes's office at the end of the corridor. The blinds were half drawn, slats of pale light striping the carpet. Harriet rose from behind her desk the moment he stepped in. She was in her 60s now, with silver streaking her dark hair and sharp eyes that had unsettled many opponents in court. Today, though, her gaze softened at the sight of him. "Walter," she said, coming around the desk. She took his hand in both of hers. "I'm so sorry about Daniel." He nodded, unable to speak. He set the binder on her desk with deliberate care. "He told me not to read the final page alone," Walter said. His voice was rough, brittle. "So here I am." Harriet pulled on her glasses and sat. The room fell into a hush broken only by the rustle of paper. She opened the binder, flipping through the neat sections Daniel had organized. Blue tabs. Green. Yellow. Her brow furrowed as she traced her finger down margins filled with Daniel's careful initials. Walter sat stiffly across from her, eyes fixed on her face. He watched her expression shift, concentration, surprise, then something else, something colder. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she reached the back. She removed the stapled packet marked Annex D and read in silence. At last, she set it down, folding her hands over the pages. For a long moment, she just stared at them, as though gathering the right words. "What is it?" Walter asked, his stomach nodding. She looked up, eyes sharp now. Daniel wasn't naive. He saw more than he let on. "What do you mean?" Harriet tapped the packet. "This is a conditional clause in the will. If Marissa mistreated you, if she evicted you, insulted you, or denied you dignity before probate, the assets don't pass to her. They move into a trust, with you as the life beneficiary." Walter blinked, stunned. "A trust? But..." "There's more," Harriet interrupted, her voice low, deliberate. "If the clause is triggered, Marissa gets nothing but a small stipend. And even that requires proof of her service hours at St. Helens Hospice." Silence stretched between them. The hum of the courthouse fountain outside seemed deafening. Walter leaned back, gripping the armrest. He remembered the Ring camera blinking as he left the mansion, Marissa's voice cutting him down in the foyer, "Pack your bags, old man." Almost without thinking, he reached into his coat and set the small memory card on the desk. "I still have this," he said. Harriet stared at it, then at him. Slowly, she smiled, not cruel, not triumphant, but with a hard satisfaction. "Then we have exactly what we need." Her fingers moved swiftly now, pulling out forms, jotting notes. "We'll file for an emergency hearing. The judge will need to see this within the week. If the recording holds up, the clause activates. Everything changes." Walter's throat tightened. The idea of winning back the house, the money, the legacy, it didn't feel like victory yet. It felt unreal, fragile. And if the judge rejects it? "Then Marissa keeps everything," Harriet said plainly. But Daniel was clever. He built this with precision. And Walter, she leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "That final page, Daniel wrote it for you. Not for me, not for the court. For you. Don't waste it." Walter swallowed hard, the weight of his son's foresight pressing down on him. For the first time since the funeral, his grief sharpened into something else. Not hope exactly, but resolve. He looked down at the binder, the memory card, and Harriet's notes. For the first time, the storm inside him quieted. Daniel had not left him powerless. The fight had only just begun. By late afternoon, the rain had thinned to mist, clinging to the mansion's iron gates like a veil. Inside, Marissa stood barefoot in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp and clipped. "Yes, list it immediately," she said. "I don't care if it's too soon after the funeral. The market is hot, buyers don't wait. Price it aggressively, and I want serious offers in 2 weeks." Her reflection in the glossy cabinet glass looked composed, almost radiant, though her tone carried an edge that no amount of makeup could soften. She tapped her French manicured nails against the marble counter as the realtor's voice buzzed back. "Yes," she snapped. "The mansion. The one Daniel left to me. The papers are signed. It's mine." She ended the call, poured herself a glass of red wine, and turned on the speakerphone. The next call went to the bank. Her words turned even sharper, clinical. "I need all liquid assets transferred into my private account. No, I don't want them frozen under the estate. He left them to me. Look at the will, read it. Daniel Hale's wife, sole beneficiary." She circled the kitchen island as she spoke, her robe trailing behind her, the wine untouched in her hand. Her voice softened slightly, but the impatience beneath it never left. "Yes, process it quickly. 18 million. Yes, all of it." The call ended. She set down the glass, finally taking a sip, and walked to the massive living room windows. The estate stretched out before her, wet grass gleaming under the low gray light. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, she allowed herself to smile, a private, secret smile. the kind of smile people wear when they believe they've won. What Marissa didn't notice was the tiny red glow above the doorframe in the foyer, the same Ring camera that had captured her voice spitting venom at Walter days earlier. The account remained active, stored in Walter's name. Every call she made, every careless admission, every moment she claimed the estate as hers without hesitation, it was being recorded, cataloged, preserved. Meanwhile, across town, Harriet sat in her office, her glasses low on her nose, scrolling through lines of metadata from the memory card Walter had given her. Each file was neatly timestamped. Each clip contained more than just images, it had audio sharp enough to slice through lies. She clicked play on one clip. Marissa's voice filled the room, cold, cruel, unmistakable. "Pack your bags, old man." Harriet's jaw tightened. She scrolled forward to the present day, pulling from the live feed. Now she heard Marissa's voice again, this time on the phone with the realtor, claiming ownership, demanding immediate sale. Harriet leaned back, her expression unreadable, though the faintest glint of satisfaction sparked in her eyes. Evidence wasn't just falling into their hands, it was walking right into their lap, gift-wrapped in Marissa's arrogance. She picked up her phone and called Walter. "Walter, it's Harriet. I've just finished reviewing the files. You need to understand, she isn't waiting. She's already moving to liquidate the assets. But that's not bad news for us." In fact, Harriet paused, her tone darkening with deliberate calm, "It proves intent. Every word she says is another nail in her own coffin." On the other end, Walter sat on the edge of the motel bed, listening. His hands shook slightly, though not from fear. For the first time, anger had begun to replace grief, heating his blood in a way that felt unfamiliar but necessary. "What happens now?" he asked. "We move quickly," Harriet said. "I'll file the motion tomorrow morning. By the time she thinks she has it all, the judge will already have our petition on her desk. And when that happens, Walter," Harriet let the sentence hang, her voice carrying the promise of something sharp, decisive. Walter closed his eyes. He pictured Marissa standing in the mansion, glass of wine in hand, smiling as though she had erased him with a word. "She thinks she's already won," he murmured. "Let her think that," Harriet replied. "Because when the gavel comes down, she'll realize too late that Daniel saw through her from the very beginning." The call ended. Walter leaned back against the headboard, the weight of the binder beside him. His grief had not lessened, but it had changed shape, hardened into something sharper. The stone was no longer outside. It was building inside him. And Marissa, oblivious in her mansion, had just given him all the proof he would ever need.
The courthouse smelled of polished wood and faint coffee, a mix of history and routine justice. Walter stood at the end of the hallway, the leather binder heavy in his hands, his black suit pressed but modest. He adjusted his tie with fingers that trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of what was about to begin. Across the corridor, Marissa Hale entered like she owned the building. She wore a tailored cream blazer, pearls at her neck, and carried herself with the confidence of someone certain the world bent to her. Her attorney, a sleek man in a navy suit, walked at her side, flipping through papers with casual ease. "Walter," Marissa said sweetly, her tone dripping with false warmth. "I hope this won't take long." Daniel wanted things simple. Walter met her gaze. His voice was low but steady. "I want what Daniel wanted." For a flicker of a second, her smile wavered before she swept past him into courtroom 3B. The room was small but dignified, rows of polished benches, tall windows casting pale light over the carved bench where Judge Elena Ramirez presided. She was a woman in her late 50s, her presence calm but commanding. She adjusted her glasses and looked at the council tables. "We're here today to address the probate of Daniel Hale's estate," she said, her tone brisk. "Counsel, proceed." Marissa's attorney rose first, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Your Honor, my client is the rightful heir to the Hale estate as designated in Mr. Hale's will. She has already taken necessary steps to maintain the property and manage assets, in good faith and in accordance with her late husband's wishes." Walter sat silently, his jaw tight. Harriet Rhodes leaned forward, her pen poised, her eyes steady on the judge. "Thank you, counsel," Judge Ramirez said. She turned to Harriet. "Ms. Rhodes." Harriet stood. Her voice was calm, deliberate, carrying a weight that drew the room's attention. "Your Honor, we do not dispute the existence of the will. What we dispute is the assumption that my client's daughter-in-law has met the conditions of that will." Specifically, she opened the binder, sliding a stapled section across the table. Annex D, the Dignity Clause. A murmur rippled through the benches. Marissa's attorney frowned, flipping through his own copy. "Your Honor, with respect, Annex D is irrelevant. My client has complied fully." Judge Ramirez raised a hand. "I'll decide what is relevant." "Ms. Rhodes, explain." Harriet's voice sharpened. "The clause states that if Mrs. Hale, at any time prior to probate, mistreats, evicts, or speaks degradingly to Mr. Walter Hale, the estate's primary assets, including the mansion and all liquid accounts, transfer into the Hale Foundation Trust, with Mr. Hale as the life beneficiary. Mrs. Hale is entitled only to a limited stipend, contingent upon verified service hours at St. Helens Hospice." The words landed like a thunderclap. Marissa's head snapped toward Harriet, then toward Walter, disbelief twisting her features. "That's absurd," she hissed, half rising from her chair. Her attorney quickly motioned her down. Judge Ramirez leaned forward, studying the document. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Counsel, did your client read the final page?" The courtroom went silent. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. Marissa's attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we reviewed the will thoroughly. There was nothing unusual." The judge flipped the binder open herself, scanning the annex with practiced precision. She lifted her gaze, pinning Marissa in place. "I'll ask again. Did you read the final page?" Walter watched from the bench, his heart pounding. He could almost hear Daniel's voice whispering through the courtroom, "The final page matters." Marissa shifted in her seat, her smile gone. Her poise cracked. She tried to speak, but no words came. Harriet's hand hovered over the laptop at her desk. The evidence was ready, the recording that could end this facade in seconds. The storm had followed them into courtroom 3B, and the first lightning strike had just landed. The judge's questions still hung in the air like smoke. "Did you read the final page?" Marissa's silence was answer enough. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles whitened, but she said nothing. Harriet moved deliberately, her expression calm, almost clinical. She opened the slim laptop on her desk and connected a small memory card. The screen flickered to life, mirrored onto the monitor beside the judge's bench. "Your Honor," Harriet said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I submit into evidence a recording from the Hale residence, time-stamped within 48 hours of Mr. Hale's passing. It shows Mrs. Marissa Hale's treatment of my client, Walter Hale." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom fell into a hush as the video began to play. On screen, the foyer of the mansion appeared, gleaming marble floor, chandeliers shining cold above. The audio picked up the faint patter of rain outside. Then came Walter's voice, weary but calm. "I'll stay in the guest room tonight. We can talk tomorrow." And then Marissa's reply, sharp, merciless, echoing across the speakers. "There is no tomorrow here for you. This is my house now.
Pack your bags, old man.
Go die in a dumpster, for all I care." Gasps rippled across the benches. Even the court clerk, who had kept a neutral face through dozens of probate hearings, glanced up in shock. On the screen, Walter bent to pick up his suitcase, slipping Daniel's photograph inside. The rain-lashed windows framed his exit. His silence was more damning than any words could have been. The clip ended. The courtroom was still. Judge Ramirez leaned back at her chair, eyes fixed on Marissa. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, but edged with steel. "Mrs. Hale, do you dispute that this recording is authentic?" Marissa's lips parted, but no sound came. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably, flipping through his notes. "Your Honor," he began, his tone strained, "grief can cause people to speak out of anger." Surely a single heated remark cannot invalidate. Harriet cut in smoothly. This is not a remark in passing. This was eviction, degradation, and proof of intent, all in violation of Annex D. The clause was written for exactly this reason. Walter sat quietly at the side table, his hands folded, but his eyes never left Marissa. He had not wanted to see the video again. He had lived it, but watching her venom played back in a court of law gave the humiliation new weight. Only now it was no longer his shame. It was hers. Judge Ramirez folded her hands, her gaze heavy on Marissa. The clause is enforceable, and this evidence makes its breach indisputable. Marissa slammed her hand on the table, her voice breaking. He's lying. He set this up. Daniel never would have. But her outburst only deepened the silence that followed. The judge's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Hale, you would do well to control yourself in this courtroom. Marissa sank back into her chair, trembling with a mixture of fury and disbelief. The judge turned to Harriet. Does the clause specify immediate consequences? Harriet nodded, sliding the document forward. Yes, Your Honor. Annex D states that if this condition is triggered, the Hale residence and liquid assets, $18 million, transfer immediately into the Hale Foundation Trust. My client, Walter Hale, is the life beneficiary. Mrs. Hale is entitled only to a small stipend, contingent upon service at St. Helens Hospice. A low murmur spread again through the courtroom. Marissa's face drained of color. The pearl necklace at her throat seemed to choke her. Walter sat very still. His heart pounded, but outwardly he looked calm, as if Daniel himself sat beside him, steadying his hand. The storm outside had eased, but in courtroom 3B, the thunder was only just beginning. The air in courtroom 3B felt heavy, as if every breath carried the weight of what had just been revealed. Marissa sat frozen, her attorney whispering frantically into her ear, but her eyes were locked on Walter. Her glare burned with venom, but beneath it, a flicker of fear had appeared, her certainty shaken. Judge Ramirez adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. We've seen evidence of breach. Annex D is valid. But before I rule, Ms. Rhodes, you indicated there was additional material? Harriet gave a small nod. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Hale left behind a personal recording, one he labeled for probate review, should this clause be triggered. It was sealed with the will and submitted on a USB drive. The judge gestured. Present it. Harriet connected the drive. The monitor flickered, and then Daniel appeared. The courtroom went utterly silent. Daniel was thinner, his skin pale from illness, but his eyes carried the same spark Walter remembered from boyhood. He sat propped against white hospital pillows, oxygen tubes at his nose. His voice was hoarse, but steady as he looked into the camera. If you're watching this, Daniel began, I didn't get to explain everything in person. Marissa, Dad, this is for you both. Marissa's hand flew to her mouth. For the first time since the hearing began, tears pricked her eyes. Not grief, but panic at what he might say. Daniel drew a careful breath. Marissa, I loved you. I wanted to believe you'd love my father too, even if grief made you angry. But if you ever forgot that he's the reason we had all of this, if you treated him with cruelty, then you don't deserve to hold what he built. That's why I wrote Annex D. Not to punish you, but to protect him. To protect the dignity of the man who raised me. He coughed, a raw sound, and reached for a sip of water. Then he continued, softer. Dad, I know this hurts. I wanted you to keep living, not just surviving. The house, the money, it's not a prize. It's a shield. I want you to use it, not hide from it. And Marissa, his eyes seemed to pierce through the screen, right into hers. If you ever wanted to share in it, you'd have to learn compassion where I learned it, at St. Helens Hospice. That's the only place I ever understood what love really means. Earn it there, or don't touch it at all. The recording ended on his faint smile, a mixture of pain and peace. The screen went black. For several seconds, no one moved. Even the judge's pen stilled in her hand. The echo of Daniel's words hung in the air like a benediction and a sentence all at once. Walter's eyes burned, but he didn't cry. Instead, he sat straighter, his son's voice filling the hollow places inside him. Daniel had seen everything. Daniel had prepared for this. Marissa shook her head violently. No, he was sick.
He didn't mean it.
He wasn't in his right mind. Harriet rose smoothly. On the contrary, Your Honor, the healthcare proxy signed just 1 week before confirms Mr. Hale's mental clarity. Mrs. Hale herself co-signed it. She slid the document forward, the ink crisp against white paper. Judge Ramirez studied it in silence, then fixed Marissa with a gaze sharp enough to cut. The evidence is clear. The clause stands, and the decedent's own words leave no room for interpretation. Marissa collapsed back into her chair, her pearl necklace shifting as if it strangled her. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, but Walter heard nothing but Daniel's voice, replaying again and again. The final page had spoken, and everything had changed. The courtroom was so silent it felt like everyone was holding their breath. Only the faint hum of the ceiling lights and the shuffle of papers broke the stillness. Judge Ramirez removed her glasses, set them on the bench, and folded her hands. "Mrs. Hale," she said evenly, her voice carrying across the room, "your late husband anticipated this exact situation. He wrote his will with precision, ensuring that dignity, not greed, would dictate his legacy. This court finds Annex D enforceable. The evidence provided, the recording of your conduct and the decedent's final statement, proves the clause was breached." Marissa's lips parted in disbelief. No, you can't. The judge raised her voice, cutting through the protest. Effective immediately, the Hale residence and liquid assets are transferred to the Hale Foundation Trust. Mr. Walter Hale is named the life beneficiary. Mrs. Hale will receive only the stipend outlined in the clause, $3,000 monthly, contingent upon verified service at St. Helens Hospice. Failure to comply nullifies even that provision. Gasps rippled across the gallery. A woman in the back whispered, "She lost everything," while a man shook his head slowly, murmuring, "Daniel saw right through her." Marissa shot up from her chair, her pearl necklace trembling against her throat. "This is outrageous." He was dying. He wasn't thinking clearly. Harriet, calm as ever, slid a document across the table. "Your Honor, as submitted, the healthcare proxy signed by Mrs. Hale herself verifies Daniel's full mental capacity when drafting this will. His clarity was legally certified." Judge Ramirez gave a single nod. "That objection is overruled. This court rules in favor of enforcement." She lifted her gavel. "So ordered." The sharp crack of wood against wood echoed like thunder. Marissa's attorney sank into his chair, defeated. Marissa herself swayed, her legs buckling, and collapsed back down, face pale as chalk. Her hand trembled on the table, but no one reached to steady her. The air around her, once so commanding, now felt like a cage closing in. Walter sat quietly through it all, his posture straight, his eyes forward. He hadn't come here for triumph. Yet hearing the words spoken aloud, the mansion and $18 million transferred to the trust, struck him with a force he hadn't expected. It wasn't victory. It was justice. The bailiff called for order as the gallery buzzed, but Judge Ramirez ended the session quickly. "Court is adjourned." She rose, leaving Marissa frozen in her seat, as though her body refused to move in a world where she no longer owned it all. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the late afternoon sun broke through thinning clouds. Walter stood with Harriet, binder clutched at his side. Reporters hadn't come. It wasn't a high-profile trial, but whispers would spread through town faster than ink. "She'll appeal," Walter said quietly. "Let her try," Harriet replied. Her sharp eyes softened. "Daniel built this airtight. He trusted you to carry it forward. Don't let her take that from you by doubting." Walter nodded, though his throat was tight. He looked down the courthouse steps, where Marissa emerged moments later. Her pearls were gone, stuffed into her purse, her face streaked with tears and smeared mascara. She didn't look at him as she passed. She only muttered under her breath, words sharp enough for him alone. "You'll regret this." But her voice cracked halfway through, and the threat sounded more like a plea. Walter didn't answer. He simply watched her walk into the sunlight, smaller than he'd ever seen her, as though the mansion's walls had been holding her up all along. For the first time in days, he felt Daniel's presence, not as loss, but as strength. His son had spoken from beyond the grave, and the world had listened. The storm had broken. But Walter knew storms leave wreckage behind. And Marissa Hale was not finished yet. The Hale mansion stood silent under the fading light, its tall windows glowing faintly against the dusk. Walter stepped through the front doors for the first time since that night, the binder still in his hands. The air smelled of lemon polish and lilies, exactly as it had during the funeral, but now the house felt different. It was no longer hers. The housekeeper, nervous but loyal, greeted him with a soft nod. "Mr. Hale, welcome home." Walter's chest tightened. Home. The word didn't feel right yet, but he let it stand. That evening, he sat at the small kitchen table with Harriet. Papers spread between them, the terms of the ruling fresh in black ink. "She's entitled to the stipend," Harriet reminded him. $3,000 a month. Only if she completes her service hours at St. Helens. You decide if her proof is acceptable. Walter frowned. "Daniel gave me the choice." "Yes," Harriet said firmly. "And that's the point. This isn't just about money. It's about whether she learns. If she doesn't, you cut her off. No appeals." Walter ran his fingers over the binder. His son's voice echoed in memory. "Earn it where I learned compassion." That night, he sat in the study instead of the grand master bedroom. He couldn't bring himself to sleep in Daniel's bed. The rain tapped gently against the windows. Walter stared at the ceiling, torn between justice and vengeance. Across town, Marissa walked into St. Helens Hospice for the first time. The coordinator, a tired but kind-eyed woman named Margaret, handed her a blue volunteer smock. "Room 12, Margaret said. "Mr. Lyle likes the window shades halfway. He won't talk much, but he notices if you forget." Marissa hesitated, the smock stiff in her hands. I've never done this before." Margaret gave a small smile. "None of us had once." The hospice halls smelled of antiseptic and lavender. Quiet voices and soft beeps filled the air. Marissa stepped into room 12, where an old man lay frail against his pillows. His eyes fluttered open. "You're not my daughter," he rasped. "No," Marissa whispered, throat tight. I'm here to help." Her hands shook as she poured water into a cup and lifted it to his lips. He sipped weakly, a drop spilling onto his chin. She dabbed it with a cloth, awkward and clumsy, but when she glanced at him again, his eyes had softened. For the first time in days, guilt pricked through her armor. At month's end, an email landed in Walter's inbox, a scanned sheet of signed service hours. No message, no apology. Just proof. Walter stared at the screen for a long while. He thought of Daniel's recording, his son demanding compassion, not cruelty. He thought of Marissa's voice in the foyer. "Pack your bags, old man." Finally, he typed a reply. Approved for this month. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't peace. It was mercy with edges, sharp, conditional, earned only 1 month at a time. But as he pressed send, Walter knew this was only the beginning. The stipend was small compared to what she had lost. The work at the hospice would strip away her pride piece by piece. Justice had been served in court. Now it would be served in life, slow, deliberate, inescapable. And Walter would be the one holding the scales. Autumn settled over the Hale estate like a quiet blanket. The magnolia leaves browned and curled, scattering across the long driveway where Walter sometimes swept in the evenings, alone with his thoughts. The mansion no longer felt like a fortress of grief. It was quieter now, less hollow, though every room still carried Daniel's shadow. On a crisp October evening, a knock sounded, not at the grand front doors, but at the narrow side entrance by the kitchen. Walter, rinsing his teacup, froze. Few people used that door. He wiped his hands on a towel, heart tightening as he opened it. Marissa stood there, hair pulled back in a plain bun, no pearls, no expensive blazer. Just a simple coat, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She looked smaller than she had in court, as though the weight of the hospice halls had stripped away her polish. "I wanted to apologize," she said quickly before he could speak. Her voice wavered. "Not for money. Not to get anything. Just to say I was cruel. I thought grief gave me permission. It didn't." Walter studied her in silence. The memory of her words, "Pack your bags, old man," still cut deep, but there was something different in her eyes now. He stepped aside. "I'm making tea," he said. "You can sit if you won't argue." She nodded, stepping into the warm glow of the kitchen. The mansion's grand dining room loomed beyond, but Walter gestured only to the small wooden table tucked in the corner. It was Daniel's favorite spot for late-night snacks when he was a boy. They sat across from each other, steam curling from their cups.
For a long moment, neither spoke.
The silence felt heavier than words. Finally, Walter reached into the binder that never left his side. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. "Harriet held this until now. Daniel left it for you. Said you should read it after 3 months at the hospice." Marissa's hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet, Daniel's familiar handwriting sprawling across it. "If you found Dad's kitchen again, you found me." Her breath hitched. Tears welled, spilling before she could stop them. She pressed the note to her chest, her shoulders shaking. For once, she didn't look like the poised woman in pearls. She looked like someone who had lost and was only now beginning to understand what she'd thrown away. Walter sipped his tea, watching quietly. He didn't soften, but he didn't harden either. "Daniel wanted you to learn where he learned," he said. "You're learning." Marissa nodded, her voice breaking. "Every night, I replay his video. Not to punish myself, just to remember his voice before the machines. I'd give anything to go back." "You can't," Walter said firmly. "But you can go forward." She looked up, eyes swollen. "I don't want the house anymore. Or the money. I just don't want to be what I was." Walter leaned back, studying her. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet tick of the clock on the wall. Then he said, "The foundation needs a caretaker for the guest house. Modest salary. It's not a second chance at what you wanted. It's a first chance at who you should be." Her lips parted, startled. "You'd trust me with that?" "I'll trust Daniel," Walter replied. "And Daniel trusted you could learn." The words hung in the kitchen, heavy but not cruel. Marissa wiped her face, nodding slowly. "Then I'll earn it, however long it takes." Walter poured more tea. "Good. Start with finishing your cup." And for the first time since Daniel's death, the mansion's kitchen held not bitterness, but the faint outline of something Daniel had wanted all along, understanding born of loss. Winter came early that year. Frost dusted the lawns of the Hale estate, turning the magnolia branches white in the morning sun. From the upstairs windows, Walter could see his breath against the glass. Yet inside the house, warmth had returned, not from the grand fireplaces, but from something quieter, steadier. The mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum. Lights glowed softly in the evenings, but never wastefully. The formal dining hall stayed locked most nights, while Walter ate his meals at the small kitchen table, sometimes alone, sometimes with a quiet guest who had once been his fiercest enemy. Marissa now lived in the guest house, a modest, ivy-covered cottage at the edge of the property. She no longer dressed in pearls or designer suits. Instead, Walter often saw her leaving for St. Helens Hospice in plain coats, carrying a battered thermos of coffee. She still moved with that same determined stride, but it no longer screamed entitlement. It spoke of purpose, sharpened by necessity. One evening, Walter found her in the foundation office, a converted study stacked with files and manila folders. She was bent over a desk, sorting through scholarship applications. The desk lamp caught the strands of hair escaping her bun. She didn't notice him at first. "These kids," she murmured, eyes on the pages. "They're brilliant. Some of them just need tuition for community college. One wants to study nursing. Another logistics, like Daniel." Her voice caught slightly at his name, but she pressed on. "We could change their lives with just a fraction of what I once wasted on handbags." Walter stood in the doorway, listening. He thought of Daniel, his son who had built warehouses but cared more for the workers who stocked them. Daniel would have smiled at this. "You'll help decide," Walter said. Marissa looked up, startled. "Me?" "Yes," Walter said firmly. "The foundation isn't mine alone. It's Daniel's legacy. And legacy isn't built by one person." Her eyes shone, though she didn't speak. By February, the first letters went out. "Congratulations, you've been awarded the Hale Scholarship." Teenagers across the county opened envelopes in kitchens and living rooms, their faces lighting up in disbelief. Some families cried, some prayed, some simply hugged and laughed. Walter read every thank you letter that came back. Some were written in neat cursive, others scrawled in messy ink, but all carried the same message: "You gave me a chance I never thought I'd have." He pinned them to a corkboard in the study, each note a small victory, each one proof that Daniel's vision was alive. And Marissa, she changed slowly, painfully, but undeniably. At St. Helens, she held trembling hands, read aloud to patients whose eyesight had failed, and wiped tears from strangers' cheeks. She often came home exhausted, her smock smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender. At first, she treated the stipend hours like punishment. But one evening, she told Walter quietly, "I stayed late. Off the clock. I couldn't leave her alone." Walter only nodded, though inside, something shifted. She was learning what Daniel had wanted her to learn all along. The mansion itself softened, too. The lights no longer screamed wealth. The halls no longer echoed emptiness. The housekeeper began leaving fresh flowers in the kitchen instead of the formal parlor, and Walter allowed it. Small things, Daniel would have approved. It wasn't the life Walter had imagined after his son's death. But it was different. It was better than silence. The Hale estate had become more than a house again. It had become a home. Not for pride or wealth, but for the legacy of a son who had seen further than either of them. Spring painted the Hale estate in soft greens, the magnolia tree blooming again outside the study window. Walter sat at his desk, sunlight spilling across the binder that had once felt so heavy in his hands. Today, though, another document lay open in front of him, draft bylaws for the Hale Foundation Trust. His pen hovered, his decision nearly made. Harriet sat opposite, her glasses perched low as she read through the clauses. "You're sure about this?" she asked quietly. "You'd still keep a modest stipend for yourself. But the bulk, it would all go directly into the foundation." Walter leaned back, his hands folded over his chest.
His voice was steady.
"Daniel didn't want me to win back money. He wanted me to win back dignity. That I already have. The rest belongs to those kids, to those hospice patients, not to me." Harriet studied him, then gave a small smile. "Your son would be proud." Walter's throat tightened. "That's all I want." That evening, Marissa walked into the study. She carried a stack of fresh letters from scholarship recipients, their words overflowing with gratitude. She set them gently on the desk. "More came today," she said softly. One of them, a girl from Glenford. "She wants to be a doctor. Said she'd almost dropped out before this letter came." Walter looked at the envelopes, their scrawled handwriting, their hope pressed into paper. He nodded slowly.
"Sit," he said.
Marissa hesitated, then pulled up a chair. Her eyes still carried shadows of the woman who once stood in pearls, demanding the world bend to her. But those shadows had softened, shaped by months of service. Walter slid the signed papers toward her. "The trust is official. The estate, the funds, they belong to the foundation now. I've kept just enough to live quietly. Everything else goes to the scholarships, the hospice, and programs Daniel would have stood behind." Marissa's eyes widened. "You gave it away?" He met her gaze, calm but firm. "Revenge isn't holding on. It's knowing you can let go on your own terms. Daniel's money won't rot in bank accounts or fuel greed. It will move the world forward." Tears pricked her eyes. "And me," she whispered. Walter regarded her for a long moment. "You'll keep working at the hospice. You'll manage the scholarship applications. That's your place here now. Not as the woman who tried to take everything, but as the woman learning how to give back." Marissa's lips trembled. She nodded, clutching the papers as though they might anchor her. Weeks later, at a small ceremony, the first Hale scholars stood on stage, nervous teenagers with wide eyes, holding certificates in trembling hands. Walter sat in the front row, clapping quietly, pride and sorrow mingling in his chest. He could almost feel Daniel's hand on his shoulder, steady, reassuring. Behind him, Marissa helped usher the students, her voice soft, her movements efficient. She didn't shine at the center anymore. She worked in the background, humbled but present. Walter glanced back once. Their eyes met briefly. No words were exchanged, but the silence said enough. She had lost everything, yet in losing, she was learning. That night, Walter walked alone through the mansion's halls. He paused at Daniel's portrait, fingers brushing the frame. For the first time, the house didn't echo with loneliness. It pulsed with something else: life, purpose, legacy. He whispered, "The final page mattered, son. You were right." And for the first time in months, Walter felt peace settle inside him. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of justice fulfilled. The old man who had once been told to pack his bags now carried nothing but dignity. And that was the sweetest revenge of all.